the end for any questions that you guys have. So.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. For those that were here for David's presentation, I think he set up his as being not as, about ethics not being as exciting as what was heard last night. If you want to listen to the administrative code presentation, I think that's even less interesting. So I hope I keep your attention throughout. But so the topic I'm getting into today, the title was recent changes, NR 151 changes this past year. So what is NR 151? I'm going to talk about what are our administrative rules that's called NR 151 for Wisconsin. I'm going to talk about the recent changes within that rule that occurred over this last year. What is in that rule? What does that mean? Some details about the rule, and then also some of the area that it impacts, and then also finish off with, okay, now that we have this rule, how does it actually become implemented? How does it get onto the landscape? So there's a lot more that can go into this, and so I'm going to try to keep it at a higher level, because NR 151 is a very complex administrative code. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of nuances about what is in there, and it can be very challenging. And then much less this new change to our statewide code. There's even a lot in that. So bear with me. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask, and then I think at the end we'll have 10 minutes to ask some questions as well. But so let's get rolling here. Like I said, this is what we're talking about here is a targeted performance standard. But before we get into what a targeted performance standard is and what that means, NR 151 is our statewide. Well, actually, NR 151 in itself is runoff. It's basically it's ag performance standards. It's performance standards and prohibitions to control non-point source runoff in Wisconsin, and they apply to urban runoff and they apply to agricultural runoff. The part I'm going to talk about today is the agricultural side of NR 151. And so in NR 151, we have the ag performance standards and prohibitions. These are things that are applied statewide to all farms. And we've heard CAFOs a little bit already. That's a permitted operation. Those are larger operations. They ultimately are meeting 151 and then beyond that. But 151, the rules, the ag performance standards and prohibitions, the APSP, these apply to all farms in the state. And these are things that say you cannot have direct runoff from a barnyard to waters of the state. And by waters of the state, we mean groundwater, streams, lakes, wetlands, those sorts of things. It also gets into things like processed wastewater, feed storage leachate. If there's significant amount of feed storage leachate running into waters of the state, that is a violation of our ag performance standards. All farms shall have nutrient management plans to describe how they're going to apply their manure and nutrients. And so these are performance standards and prohibitions, and there's a whole series of them. The original set of these performance standards were promulgated in code in 2002, and then since then there were additional performance standards added into that code that became active and required by farms in 2010. So it's a living, just like all administrative rules, as there's identified need to revise code or add additional regulation, they can be opened up and more rules apply, and that takes a process, right? It takes a public interest to drive the political will, and then as a government agency, we're under that influence, and we have to follow a prescribed administrative rule process. So it's not just the DNR decides, hey, we want to add more information to this. This goes through a large involved process with all members of the industry and environmental groups, government agencies, and specifically to this rule, producers are there, and scientists, and we're talking about what should go into this rule, and so that's part of the process. But really, so 151, we have statewide ag performance standards, and what I want to get to is then recently these statewide standards were revised specifically to the Silurian Bedrock area, which is where we're at. And that's the relevance of my presentation. So the DNR authority for targeted performance standards, that's the TPS abbreviation there, lies in 151. It's 151.004. And basically in there it says, so we went through, the statewide performance standards were developed. And in there it says, okay, where we've been able to identify that these performance standards don't go far enough to protect the resources or to achieve water quality standards or groundwater quality standards, the DNR has the authority to develop a targeted performance standard. So targeted being a specific area, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is where the authority lies. And one important steps to this, and I talked about public interest and political will to allow that to proceed. Like I said, DNR can't just open up and say, we're going to develop a new standard here. There has to be some level of interest to drive the political will and allow that process to go through and get approval by the legislature, get approval by the governor for this to become part of the administrative code. And one of the, a big component of that is being able to document that we're implementing existing standards. So for us to do a targeted standard, we have to be able to say that the current standards don't protect the resources enough. And we have to show that we're implementing the existing standards at a significant level to be able to make the case that the existing rules aren't protective enough, and we need to go beyond that. We need a more targeted standard, and so we'll get into what the recent targeted standard that was created this year is about. And I said, so how did this targeted standard come about? Like I said, it's a public interest driving the political will, and then ultimately getting DNR approval to start the process for revising the code. In this case, as I'm assuming many of you are from the area and have been aware of, maybe some location or specific areas of the Silurian Bedrock. Specifically, there's some spots in Kewaunee County that ran into some frequent groundwater events where manure was applied, and it went into people's faucets, came out their water. It came into their well and then ultimately into their household infrastructure, right? And part of that is the geology of Silurian, of the karst rock, and thanks for the example here of where that land is, where that manure is applied, and it percolates through whatever soil is there, and then gets into rock and all the fissures and holes and all that. You don't know where it ends up, and that's the unique geology that initiated the targeted performance standard, and was a reason why we saw more of these groundwater events occur up in the Kewaunee County area, Kewaunee County spots around, I forgot the township, Lincoln Township, and other parts. There was other areas within the Silurian Bedrock that had groundwater events. In 2007, there was a task force created. There was enough interest to create a task force to look at what's going on. They created the karst report. It had a list of recommendations about how to address this issue. Ultimately, a lot of those recommendations weren't picked up or implemented. It didn't really go anywhere. So we still continue with groundwater events and issues with people's wells being impacted by manure, land applied manure. And so there was public drive and requested EPA to investigate the Kewaunee County groundwater contamination issue. And now you start to see the public interest, right, driving some of the political will. And so with that political will becomes interest from legislature, from governor, coming to the DNR secretary, that goes down to our program to say, hey, we need to start looking into this. I think we have the support to draft new administrative code to potentially address this issue. And so that's what initiated this groundwater collaboration work group. This was I wasn't a part of this. This is about the time that I came into my position right now, but several members of all sides of farmers up here, Peninsula Pride, environmental groups, government agencies would meet regularly up in Luxembourg and talk about different parts of, if we were to develop a standard, what would it look like? What are some things we should consider? So ultimately, this was a group that brainstormed some ideas to sort of shape the beginnings of this targeted standard that ultimately came through. They created a final report, and that was the basis for where we started from in creating the targeted performance standard, which was initiated in 2016. So it was started in 2016. As an administrative code begins, we're required to have that completed now within 30 months. So we're on a fast process, and there's a lot that goes into developing that code. And so ultimately, it was initiated in 2016, and it was promulgated, signed into, became active in NR 151 in July of 2018, to where it's now required for all farms. So what is this targeted Silurian performance standard? So I want to get into summarizing what this rule is. And like I said, there's a lot of details and nuances within it, enough where 30 minutes up here that's not even enough to describe what's in the rule. So I can only touch on some of the basics of it. But basically, this rule was structured first at different soil depths, or depth to bedrock. And so at the shallowest soil depths, the rule is most restrictive. And as you get deeper into the soil, the rule becomes less restrictive, but there are requirements at each of these soil depths. And so the Silurian Bedrock Performance Standard applies and it's defined, the Silurian Bedrock area, it's the 15 county area. And within those 15 counties on the eastern side, of course, including Door, it applies to 20 feet of soil above bedrock. Anything beyond 20 feet of soil to the bedrock, this rule does not apply. So a quick summary of the target standard: the 0 to 2 foot soil depth to rock in this area, there's no manure allowed. This is the most restrictive, this is the prohibition. There's no liquid or solid manure in the Silurian bedrock area where there's less than 2 feet of soil over Silurian bedrock. There's a requirement to verify what is in your field, what's in the field, and so so they can there's either an in-field verification that they can conduct, they can show that actually we have more than 2 feet. You know, we want to have that information available, or they can use maps. And so we created a GIS, a data layer based on rock depth studies that were done, mapping projects that were done back in the 70s and 80s by the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. And that was the most current data we had. As we went through this process, and originally our rule said farmers must do in-field verification to show where the rock is. As we went through the process, it was recommended that we should allow for mapping to be used as another tool to show where the rock is. But to be able to show mapping, we didn't have that map layer. So we went through and digitized these maps and created a rock layer, and I'll show that to you in a little bit. And basically now we have a rock layer from 0 to 20 feet, and it's more useful information as farms are developing nutrient management plans. And it's become a part of a tool that most of our farms are using in developing the nutrient management plan and creating these maps of their fields. So with this rule, so as you saw in the earlier slide, it's broken up into different rock depths. And as you get into deeper soils, it becomes less restrictive. But outside of the 0 to 2 feet, the prohibition, there's 3 compliance options for each depth area, and it's based on either the rate of manure you apply, the timing of the application of your manure, or the type of manure that you're applying. Is the pathogens reduced? Is it digested? Was it composted? Does it meet a certain level of pathogen reductions? And so not only does this rule have different depths where requirements are different, it also has different options to comply. And like I said, it's reduced rates. It could be timing, applying closer to the planting date in your fields, or it could be pathogens. And so depending on the farm, they have to decide what is most useful to us. Some of these farms will have digesters, or they have compost facilities where their manure meets a digested level, and it's easier for them. Now they're not restricted by the rate because they have reduced pathogens in the manure. Other farms that may not have that may have a larger land base, And although maybe some of their fields have shallow rock, maybe they have other acreage that is deeper soils. And so they can handle their manure by going to those fields first and find other ways to, they can apply most of their manure maybe on deeper soil fields, and on their shallow soil fields maybe have to go to the rates, but ultimately the impact isn't as significant. And of course there's going to be farms that are tight on land base and have a lot of shallow rock, and those that are going to be the greatest challenges. So my point is that these rules, and there's different compliance options, but it's going to have different levels of impact on these facilities. Then I'll talk a little bit more about how we implement, how do we work with these farms, and the implementation side. What's that?
Are you taking any questions that you're?
Yeah, go ahead.
What about bodies of water slope of the field? Does that change the spreading paths? If you're within, your farm runs right up to a creek, or you have a pretty significant slope on your farm, does that change the spreading regulations?
Right, so a lot of those are already requirements for farms in their nutrient management plan. So there are already those restrictions, and there is some additional setbacks and stuff like that in this rule, but we're gonna go pretty deep in the rule to talk about the setbacks. But the farms should be, there are already slope restrictions and also time of the year for applying manure, and that's described in their nutrient management plan. That's an NRCS technical standard. It describes a nutrient management plan. So these farms already have to have a nutrient management plan, and then they also have, these farms in the area also have to comply with these standards. So not specifically distance to a surface water, because again, this rule is specific to groundwater impacts and it's pathogens. It's not nutrients, it's what pathogens. Trying to prevent pathogen contamination of groundwater.
Sir?
Yeah.
How do you enforce those rules?
Yeah, I'll talk about that right at the end, okay? Sorry. Again, and so I won't get too much into this, but this is a table that summarizes the different compliance options. And so I'll just quickly talk about that, as we, this box here, basically these are the same requirements. So we talk about restricted rates. We talk about timing of applications, so they apply closer to the planting date of their crops, and then also reduce pathogens. And then it also refers to application rates table, and that's the next slide here, which is also, this table was taken out of existing code, and it's related to industrial waste, liquid industrial waste, and how that's applied. So the rates in the standard are based off the hydraulic loading capacity of the soils. So for example, in this rule, in the 2 to 3 foot depth to rock areas, they're restricted to one of those sandy loam, silt loam type soils. They're restricted to 13,500 gallons per acre per year. So once they put that amount on those areas for that crop year, they're done. They can't go back out there. That's the most amount of manure they can put on that for that year. So that's the most restrictive rate. At the 3 to 5 foot, it has the same amount of manure, but it can go on per week. So up to, and of course, it's not just going to go 13,500 gallons every week of the application year. They're going to spread that out over their fields, and they have to meet their nutrient management plan and the agronomic needs of their crops is the intent of this. So, but what they're saying is it's split applications, which is what farms are doing already. But what they're saying is there's more flexibility in the 3 to 5 foot soil depths. There's a little more distance to the rock, so that there's a little more flexibility allowed in the rule. Yeah.
So basically, from the difference between 0 to 2 or 0 to 3 and 3 to 5 is 50 times. I mean, if you take the limit, you're saying a guy could put on 50 times as much in a 3 to 5 foot soil base than he can from 0 to 3.
50 times.
Well, you're saying once a week he can put on his.
Well, what I'm saying is that these are actually low rates. 13,500 gallons per acre of liquid manure is a pretty low application rate already. And in areas where they don't have shallow rock, we're looking at more towards, depending on the needs, it could be upwards of 20,000 gallons per acre, depending on what the content of the manure is, the nutrient content, what crop needs are, and stuff like that. This is already pretty low application rates. And a farm, they're not just going to go, they need, so think of the amount of animals they have, they're also gonna need the land base to grow the crops for feed for those animals. So, they're not just gonna hit the same field over and over again at that rate. They can go to that rate once a week for those, but the chances are they're gonna hit at some point, you know, they're gonna, once they get close to maybe 18, 20,000 gallons per acre, they're gonna, the crops don't need that much more than that, so they're gonna go somewhere else. It just allows more flexibility for them at those soil depths. So it's not that they're gonna go there every week. And then as you get to the 5 to 20 foot depth, again, these are very high application rates, 27,000 gallons per acre. Like I said, these numbers are already in existing code, and we were encouraged to use existing code as we wrote the rule. But this asterisk on here says, or whichever is less between this table or the recommended needs of the crops by the agronomic needs of the crop. So it's likely they're gonna be less than 27,000 gallons per acre, because that's gonna exceed the crop needs. And that's also gallons per acre per week, yeah.
For the agronomic needs, is that based on phosphorus or nitrates or both?
Both,
Okay.
yeah. It should be nitrate based
Okay.
for needs of the crop. For the nutrient management plans, it's a phosphorus based rules. So getting into kind of the area, this data is from these historical, 70s, 80s, these hard copy maps that were created by Wisconsin Geological Natural History Survey. And basically we digitize these, and this is the data layer that's out in Snap Maps. Snap Maps is basically the nutrient management planning software that most farms are using these days. UW, University of Wisconsin has developed this tool, and it's a tool that's most commonly used by agronomists and farms. This data is out there to help them look at their field, that they can zoom into their parcel and see if they have any of these polygons, this rock depth in their field, so they can plan. So then they can show, okay, well in this area, I do have shallow rock and I need to adjust my applications accordingly. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is basically, this is the targeted area of the rule, these counties that's identified as Silurian bedrock, and then within that, these colored areas are actually the areas that are part of the rule. Outside of these colored areas where it's just white, where it's not shallow rock, this rule doesn't apply. It's just in these areas that there's shallow rock up to 20 feet. So these affected areas, again, there's a lot of numbers, a lot of data up here. My point in this is just wanted to highlight that of the Silurian acres within 20 feet to rock, there's 15.8% of the Silurian acres have bedrock within 20 feet. Sorry about that. Let me just rephrase that. 15.8% of all the Silurian acres of all the counties are within 20 feet to rock of soil. 20 feet of soil to rock. Of the cropland acres over the Silurian bedrock that could be affected by this rule, there's 17.6% of all the cropland in this targeted area is impacted by this rule. So what we're saying is all the cropland acres, so right here, 284,000 acres that is within 20 feet to rock is basically where this rule applies in the Silurian bedrock area. And then looking statewide, basically this rule is impacting basically 3% of the acres statewide. So again, it's a targeted standard. These are some of the numbers on the number of acres that it applies to. So again, to your question about enforcement, implementation. All right, so this is where our rule can get real complex. But the idea here is the DNR, the Department of Ag, Trade, Consumer Protection, and our county land conservation partners are partner agencies in working towards implementing NR 151. It's our non-point source pollution program. And so it's a collaboration between all of our agencies. So we're developing the rules, the performance standards. DADCAP, they define how do you comply with that. What are some things you can do to comply with our performance standards that we create? So let's say our performance standard says no direct runoff to waters of the state from a feedlot. Okay, the DADCAP would say one thing you can install is a barnyard runoff control practice, collection system, something like that. And so we define the what, DADCAP defines the how to comply with that. And a lot of it is referencing NRCS standards, different facilities there, so.
But that cat has no enforcement ability.
Right, we have the enforcement ability, and a lot of the counties have an enforcement, level of enforcement that they have through ordinances, and it varies depending on the county. But you're right. So the process that we're gonna go through with the counties is county outreach. The idea of our non-point program is local implementation of our NR 151 Ag Performance Standards. So we're gonna work with the counties and identify kind of the universe, how many farms in the area are impacted by this new targeted standard. We're gonna distribute some maps and work with these farms individually to show where they might be impacted, some fields that they should be paying attention to, reviewing the nutrient management plans to see where their land bases are and identify where there's areas of shallow rock. We want to be proactive in working with our farmers, our producers, so that they can comply with this rule. And then where we have issues of non-compliance, we want to recommend to them some things that could be done for them to comply with the rule. And again, this is going to be case-by-case specific. The requirements to comply for these farms will be different among each farm. They're not all the same. You know, some will have bigger land bases. Some will have the ability to comply with this rule, depending on the amount of manure they create, the amount of manure generated, and the land base that they have to handle it, and the geology in the area. Maybe they have small land base, but they don't have any shallow rock. So it's going to vary between each farm. And the enforcement process. So one thing that you have to be aware of is the way our rules were created so where we've determined non-compliance, we have an implementation and enforcement procedure defined in NR 151 that we have to follow. This was part of the code as originally promulgated in 2002. All right, so where we've determined non-compliance, and the DNR would issue a notice of non-compliance letter to them. So we would write a letter to a farm saying, hey, we've met with you, we went over to your site, we found non-compliance with NR 151, and then there's required pieces of information that we have to put in that letter, including some options to comply, some ideas of how to comply with the rule, some technical resources, working with the county land conservation departments, and also a compliance deadline. We have to put a deadline in there that says when you need to be in compliance by this with this rule. The other part of our implementation is where there is cost share eligible practices. We have to provide cost share to help them achieve compliance with the rule. Because the idea with our rule is we set a bar, a performance standard, back in 2002, and the agreement was if we're going to implement this, we need to help that. We basically changed the level of performance, and so it was agreed upon that if we're going to require compliance with our non-permitted farms, we have to assist them with cost share to get there. And so before we can enforce where they're non-compliant with this target performance standard, we have to offer them cost share to correct the issue before any enforcement can occur. Yeah.
If they've already received cost share dollars, as I understand it, then it's assumed that they're in compliance in perpetuity. So would they be eligible if they'd already received cost share to get new cost share to meet new requirements?
It depends on what part of the performance standards they were non-compliant with that they received cost share before.
Okay.
So if they were not compliant for a different part of 151 back in like 2007, then they received cost share to fix that issue and then became compliant with that performance standard then. Well, now this new targeted standard was created in 2018, right? So now we've set a new bar. Basically all these farms that are in the area that are not, they're all eligible for cost share to become compliant. Now, the question we have now is what are some things that we can cost share, to really comply with this rule? There's gonna be a lot of nutrient management plan revisions. And there's a cost to that, moving manure around, creating maps, stuff like that, which, may not be a significant cost, but there will be some cost there. And we have the ability to cost share some nutrient management plan changes.
The source putting in a primary processing, equipment to, you know, go through the primary or tertiary treatment, whatever.
Right.
Is there,
You know, when we went through the rule process, I mean, there was an element of predicting the costs associated with the economic impact of this rule. And there was a lot of different things that we looked at. Trucking was not one of them, but I know that that's been an option for one farm up in Door County that, you know, just doesn't have the land base to handle their manure, and they are moving their manure out somewhere else. I don't know exactly where
there's
it's
probably
going.
areas that are very nutrient starved, you know, area farms that don't have the use and don't have the animals, whatever, that could use the material. And
Yeah.
I just was wondering if anybody's ever done a study on trucking the stuff to an area that needs it rather than.
Right. No, and that may be an option. And, you know, but then you get into, okay, well, what's the cost to the, you know, that's hauling manure and all the weight of that, and, you know, can be a pretty maybe an expensive thing for a farm. Also, the damage to the roads potentially during certain times of the year. Those are all things to consider. But you're right. That's maybe one option where if they know another producer that is starved with manure and has deeper soils that can handle that and still comply with our performance standards, you know, nutrient management plans, stuff like that, that might be an option. But I think one thing we're seeing more and more these days are more compost facilities. There's new technology out there about taking liquid manure and working it through a system to get to a dry product. So there's less mass, less mobility on the field once it gets on the field. Those are things that are now just becoming are coming out right now, and it's, you know, it's new technology, so it's tough to get our, you know, producers or people to buy in, because there's a, you know, significant cost in jumping into some of these new technologies. But, you know, that's kind of where we're at right now. That's the next step. What are some things regionally that could be done to help some of these producers potentially? Could there be some regional digesters installed that more producers can go to and then receive a digested product? Much like down in Dane County, there's a couple of cases where they've located a manure digester, and then several farms within the area are piped into it, and their product goes in, they pull phosphorus out, and then, you know, they can digest the pathogens out, and then it goes back to be a, you know, a product like that. I mean, there's some of those things that still, you know, they have to figure out. There's a lot of options out there is what I'm trying to say.
But then
And trucking may be
about,
one.
I mean, taxing these capos for, I mean, because people around them lose property value. They have to deal with the smell, the contamination, 24/7. Is there anybody suggesting taxes on this?
Yeah, I haven't heard discuss. I mean, I don't think that's been a discussion on taxing certain farms to help pay for the rule. That's just, I haven't heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will these rules
Sorry.
solve Huron County's problems that are in the news all the time about contaminated wells and poor drinking water? Will if these are implemented there, will their problems get solved?
That's one thing I can't answer that. This rule was designed with the goal of trying to do exactly what you would, to ultimately eliminate groundwater events. Just like the rest of the 8 performance standards, they're not all guaranteed to be protective of groundwater and surface water standards. It's just, the standards started somewhere. Okay, it started with, like, we think by addressing these things, it'll be protective of our waters, much in the same way as this standard. It was an agreed upon level of protection that we think will help in reducing those impacts, but I think only time will tell. As we start seeing implementation of the rule, you know, where producers are starting to apply and comply with this rule, I think we may be able to see some of those changes. But I can't say it will guarantee those protections. Hold on.
You're talking about cost sharing as far as implementing better practices. Is there cost sharing available for if a smaller farm or even a medium or large size farm would want to start to implement composting as a solution to this faulty liquid manure system?
Right.
Is the cost sharing even available for implementing new systems, or is it only
they describe the how to comply. And that's that's in their code. Okay, so their code, their administrative code is AdCap 50, and then they describe the technical standards for complying with 151 through like partner documents. Right now, that rule does not include compost facilities in there. And so our cost sharing programs look at what is in, basically it looks into what's in AdCap 50 as cost shareable practices. We reference that code for our grant programs to pay for those things that are in that code. So right now, there is a way for our grant program to do that, and we have some code language that says we can look outside of that through alternative practices. The reality is, large compost facilities, these new technologies, they're going to be pretty expensive facilities. We have one that came in that, we're looking at $1.5 million for one facility to build a compost facility. Our grant programs, the NOD program did about $1 million each year. So we're going to be limited on our resources to pay for all those things, to fully implement compost facilities at all farms. But also what I'm saying is AdCap 50 would need to be opened up and revised to include compost facilities for us to be more able to pay for those facilities universally through our grant programs. So it's part of the change that happens. AdCap it's now their job to look at their rule and see how they can make changes to it to comply with this new targeted standard. And that's been where a lot of our meetings and talks have been. So the answer is yes, we can find a way, but right now it's not as clean as a grant program typically works to do that.
So you described that there were a number of constituencies involved in developing this rule.
Mm-hmm.
Was the scientific community accepting of where you placed the
requirements
per acre per?
Yeah, I would say that the science side of it, the geologists, some of their studies, to have the least amount of risk, they're looking at deeper protection, deeper restrictions, larger soil depth separations. But then the question becomes, well, if we go there, that's the rulemaking process for our state agencies. That it's both. We have to consider both sides of the issue. So it becomes because that was those deeper protections were just wasn't something that at the time we could get for this rule because of the impact on the industry. It would be something that really no farms would likely be able to comply with right now. And that's common in rulemaking process. It's steps. And so we can't just go from having zero restrictions to the ultimate restrictions. It just doesn't work for the industries that we need as well. So I would say it's a middle ground, and that was ultimately why this rule got unanimous support from the Natural Resources Board and was unanimously supported through our legislature. That they see that there's additional protections here, and it's supported by the industry, and it went through our legislature quicker than just about any other rules that we've seen recently come through. So I think it received a lot of support as it is, and was a middle ground for that mutually agreed upon between all the parties that were involved.
Questions? Many of you have probably seen me before in this area. Usually I'm standing in a hole in the ground because my passion is soils, right? I love to be in soil pits. I love to look at that biology. I love to look at root structure. I love to look at soil structure, which are those little aggregates, those little heads, that cookie crumb structure, that chocolate cake structure in the soil, right? And that's what I'm talking about today, right? Because when we look at water quality, it all comes back to how the soil interacts with that water. And I'm going to be talking specifically about surface water, but many of the same principles apply when we're talking about groundwater. So when we look at, if you see my beautiful slides, right, we would be talking about surface water. We know right now about 18% of the waters in the state of Wisconsin are on the EPA 303D list for impaired water, meaning that they have some way, shape, or form are impaired for aquatic life, they're impaired for drinking water, for recreational purposes, so on and so forth. So 1/5 of all the waters in the state of Wisconsin are impaired. And what are they impaired by? There are two primary sources of that impairment. Does anybody know what they are?
Phosphorus and PCBs.
Well, phosphorus, I'll go with phosphorus. PCBs in this area would be high up on the list, but when we look at statewide,
Nitrates is medium.
actually it's not. It's not, and it's not pathogens. And it's something why I'm here today. It's phosphorus and cyanotoxins. Wow, I love talking to groups that can come up with really good words, right? So we got cyanotoxins, we got polychlorinated biphenyls. I was thinking sediment, but you guys can go. It's too simple, right? You guys can go wherever your mind wants to go. It's actually our #1 contaminant in surface waters is sediment. Simply soil. Right? And why is that a bad thing? Right? Soil is wonderful, right? Obviously, I drove all the way over here to talk to you about soil today. It's wonderful, except when we get too much of it in water. And why is that? We know that sedimentation impairs water quality, water clarity, right? Which impacts aquatic wildlife. It also is our primary source of that phosphorus, right? So we could get into the chemistry, and I think with this group I could get into the chemistry, but they didn't give me a whiteboard to draw all these bonds, right? When we look at how much of the phosphorus gets into our water systems, it's actually via sediment. It's nutrients attached to those soil particles that get in the water. And that's why I'm here today. If our #1 contaminant for surface water is sediment, right? It's simple. Keep the sediment out of the water. Easy peasy. And we're done. 30 minutes over, right? It's not as easy as it sounds, right? So when we look on average, I came from Missouri prior to coming to here, right? We were losing on average, depending upon the part of the state, around 10 to 15 tons of soil per acre per year, right? Realize soil science, that's a lot. If you don't, and I'll put that in perspective, right? When we look at many of our soils, we have something that's called tolerable soil loss. Tolerable soil loss is the amount of soil that we can lose per year and still maintain productivity. Because we know geologic forces are in play. Soil erosion has been around for decades. How many of you have been to the Grand Canyon? That's soil erosion, ladies and gentlemen, all right? It's geologic. Sometimes we can't control it, but when we started to alter the landscape, we accelerated it. So when we come back to this idea of tolerable soil loss, we know we're gonna lose some soil, but what can we lose to maintain productivity? And for many of the soils in Wisconsin, it's somewhere between about 1 ton and 5 ton, depending upon the soil type. Up here where we have soil shallow to bedrock, we're looking at maybe that 1 to 3 tons per acre per year. To put that also in perspective, that I'm thinking, oh, my goodness, right? We'll use proper terms when I'm speaking, right? What does that look like? 5 tons per acre per year is the thickness of a dime. So it's not much, all right? So when I talk in tons, you all are thinking amazing amounts. And it is an amazing amount. But when you spread that tonnage over an acre, it's about the thickness of a dime. It's a problem, right? So I'm here today, right, because I'm not out in the field, right? I still have research plots to go in. Mother Nature oftentimes, right, challenges us. And she's challenging us as an agricultural community this spring, right? She's challenging me as a gardener this spring, right? Between the wetness and the temperatures, I'm having a problem getting my crop into the ground. Farmers are having a problem getting their crop into the ground. And as you drove here today, did you notice there's soil moving? Right? It is. Right? And so what I'm here to talk about is soil health. Right? How can I change farming practices? How can I basically change my mentality about a soil? Right? So that we can improve water quality, improve productivity, improve efficiency, all across the board. So who knows what soil health is? All right. How many of you, I mean, we have polychlorinated biphenyls. You haven't heard of soil health? Somebody's read something somewhere, right? What's the whole premise of soil health? The soil is alive. That's the premise of soil health, right? I always get into a soil pit and I pulled up 1 teaspoon of soil, right? You're of an age, I don't have to explain what a teaspoon is. So when I hold a teaspoon of soil, right? I always explain it as a small spoon in the drawer, right? Teaspoon. How many organisms in a healthy soil live in that teaspoon of soil? A lot. Now you are just like a first grader, right? There's a lot, Jamie. Ooh.
Is there somebody a little bit?
I love this. All right, here we go. A lot.
Oh, I keep it calm.
All right, everybody watch. Here's some of my time goes to the guy with the broomstick. All right, I love it. Thank you, sir. When all else fails, use brute force, right? So as he rides off into the sunset on his broom, what is it? All right, I'll bring it back. How much is it? How much is a lot? Look at, there it is. Right? How much is a lot? In a teaspoon of soil, there's approximately a billion. A billion. With a B. 901 with 9 zeros behind it. Soil microorganisms in a healthy teaspoon of soil. Right? And I'm going to talk about, as we move through some of these slides very quickly, why those organisms are very important to us. So basically, here's a slide saying we have a lot of water in Wisconsin, right? So I always love this 1.2 quadrillion gallons of groundwater. More than 15% of Wisconsin's covered in water. We have 15,000 inland lakes and 84,000 river and stream miles, right? These are our good waters. We're gonna go fast. These are our good waters. These are our impaired waters, right? These are the ones, and this is, if you didn't believe me, it's not on the screen, so here's another caveat, right? We got it on, but it's not all on the screen, right? There was total phosphorus. Whoop, come back, baby, right there. There's sediment, right? And total phosphorus. Mercury was another big offender, but I don't worry about that in my talk because I can't control atmospheric deposition. I talk about soils, right? So how do we reduce that sedimentation? I reduce soil erosion. How do I reduce phosphorus? I reduce soil erosion. I also manage my nutrients more aggressively. But I'm going to concentrate on erosion. Because that's something that should be easy to understand, right? It's easy to understand, it's difficult to control. So how do we reduce soil erosion, right? We reduce detachment. So there's 3 processes to soil erosion: detachment, transport, deposition. Detachment is those raindrops coming down, splashing that soil, right? Breaking the soil aggregates apart, getting it moving. And once that soil starts to move, then runoff waters will carry it into other parts of the field, or those runoff waters will carry those into surface waters where they're then deposited. So conceptually, right? How do we reduce erosion? Conceptually, it's easy as pie. We protect the soil from raindrops. Right? You're all laughing, right? This is common sense, I know, right? But how do we do that? Have you ever thought about that? In a conventional agricultural system, how do I protect my soil from raindrops? In my cover crops, right? In my garden, right? I'm gonna harvest, right? I always bring this back, so some of you aren't farmers. We all have a role in improving erosion rates on our landscape. We all have a role in soil health, right? We have a cover crop. We grow a permanent, perennial type crop. We keep something alive, or I don't care if it's dead, right? Dead corn stalks do a great job of intercepting raindrops. I don't care if it's dead or alive. I just need something to protect, to shield that soil. I need to get the water to infiltrate or to soak in. And this is where I spend a lot of time. Follow me around someday. We just stand around and we watch water soak into the ground. It's fantastically fun. Right? Hours later, it's like, yep, didn't go anywhere. All right. But it's huge, right? So I work in some fields that have been managed a little more intensively. So down in the valley, right? So I may only infiltrate an inch or less of water in an hour. On the Green Bay campus, on the restored prairie, we watch 27 inches of water an hour. go into that soil. It's huge, right? An inch versus 27 inches. When you think about how that impacts soil erosion rates, if I can get that water in, it's not moving off. If it's not moving off, it's not taking sediments and nutrients with me. And I can hold water on that landscape, right? I love wetlands, but we're not going to talk about that today. But I love wetlands, all right? They were there. They serve a purpose. They hold water on the landscape, and they release it slowly back into the system. So not only all the benefits ecologically, but for soil erosion, they trap sediment, right? And they hold that water. So let's get going. Now it doesn't want to go anywhere. So this is the day of technical challenges, all right? So what about soil? Ooh, did I call up your? No, I didn't do anything. She has to run a map. Can you make it go ahead? There we go. So how do we do this? Healthy soil, right? How many of you have heard the 5 NRCS principles for healthy soils? No. All right. Great. Right? The whole idea of maintaining those billion microorganisms in that soil. And what do those billion microorganisms do? Those billion microorganisms, I love to talk about slime, right? My favorite organism to talk about are mycorrhizal fungi. What do those guys do? Mycorrhizal fungi not only infect that plant root, they're symbiotic, they're beneficial, they infect that plant root, and they help that plant take up nutrients, in particular phosphorus, as well as many of the micronutrients, but they produce, and I'm going to use this on you, a glucoamine product. They produce snot, right? That glues these aggregates together. We know that 90%, researchers show 90% of those beautiful little aggregates, again, that cottage cheese type structure, those little balls in a really good soil that you see at the soil surface, we know that 90% of those are glued together by this fungal exudate. It's biological. You all thought maybe it was just clay sticking them together. No, it's fungal snot sticking them together. And we need those organisms. So how do we keep a healthy soil? Maximize the presence of living roots. We're going to talk about those cover crops, right? Who knows what a cover crop is? Excellent. Now I got to explain that one, right? The whole idea of a cover crop not only is to shield that soil, but that root. Where do most of these organisms live? We know they live in the rhizosphere. They live in a small area around that plant root where they're picking up sugars, they're picking up water, they're hanging out, right? They have shelter, food, water. They live in that rhizosphere. So when we maximize the presence of living roots, we maximize our biology. When we maximize our biology, we maximize how that soil functions, right? Think about this. We maximize roots, we maximize fungi, we maximize snot, we maximize aggregates, right? When we maximize aggregates, we maximize infiltration. Water moving into the ground, water moves into the ground, we don't get erosion, clean water, bam, right? That's the whole concept. Right? Some of you are going, yeah, some of you are going, she's better without the slides. We also minimize disturbance, right? You notice I didn't say everybody has to go to no-till. I would love it if everybody went to no-till, but minimize disturbance. Every time we stir that soil up, we break those fungal networks. Every time we stir that soil up, we destroy that aggregation. Every time we stir that soil up, we destroy those microbial communities. So if we can minimize disturbance, if we can eliminate it, wonderful. But if we can minimize it, we know we're going to improve soil health. This one says keep the soil covered. And we know we got that concept down, right? That armor to keep that soil in place. Maximize diversity. What does that mean?
Crop rotation.
Grow a lot of different crops, right? Grow a lot of different crops. Maximize diversity. So maybe change, I talk a lot to farmers about changing up a rotation. Corn, soybean, wheat, cover crop. Corn, soybean, wheat, cover crop, right? Looking at some of these alternative forages that we can push into some of the dairy rations, right? So not only is it plant biodiversity, I like nutrient biodiversity. So I'm going to go out on a limb, but I do like manure, right? When used according to the 4 R's, right rate, right time, right place, right source, when it is used according to the 4 R's, it is phenomenal for the soil, right? It feeds the microbial diversity, right? It's a wonderful source. Not only do they get the nutrients they need, the water they need, but they get a carbon source, they get a food source. Manure, used appropriately, is phenomenal. It's a great way to recycle those nutrients. So I'm looking at diversity as not only plants, but also getting animals back into that landscape. So what is soil health? We said it's all about the organisms. The actual NRCS definition is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem. This is something new, right? It really is. When I went to college, we didn't even go through my whole bio, right? Iowa, Oklahoma, it didn't matter where I was at. I learned better living through chemistry, just like many of you did, right? We are the generation of better living through chemistry. I took one soil microbiology class in many, many years of college. We know, because that's the way the soil, we thought the soil was, right? It was a bunch of little rocks. We tilled it up, we gave it some fertilizer, and bam, we got crops. Now we know that's not the way it technically works. It's a living ecosystem. And that living ecosystem, that biology influences that physical property, and we talked a lot about those aggregates, how water moves through that soil. It influences chemical properties, as well as that biological properties. So whenever you see a soil, right, I always put up this cartoon. This is what you should see, right? It's a new mindset. How many of you see a home when you look at that soil? None of you, right? You do. A+ for the day. I have no grades to hand out, but we'll give you an A+. All right. We see a home, right? Those physical properties, how that soil combines itself into aggregates, are like the windows, doors, walls, and plumbing. It's the structure of that soil and the home, structure of that home for those organisms. That water, those nutrients, so on and so forth. The pH, right? That's like the pantry. Right? That's like the kitchen. That's where the organisms go to get the food they need to maintain their biological activities. And then there's the biology themselves, right? Think about them as the people, the pets, the plants, the food, everybody inside. It's a home, and that physical, chemical, and biological processes are all important and play a role in that home, right? In particular, when we think about water quality, right? Aggregate formation. I've used that word now a million times. Maybe not a million, a little overestimate. What is an aggregate? Right? So when you think about a soil, right, it's a sand, silt, and clay there's sand, silt, and clay particles. Aggregates are how they shape themselves, how they combine themselves, right? So I'm gonna move ahead, right? Just ignore me here for a second. I'm gonna move ahead and show you some structure. Go back, right? This is what I'm talking about. If you look at this picture, does it not make you warm and fuzzy inside? It does me, right? I was standing in this soil pit. Actually, I'm in Kewaunee County. There's a cover crop on the surface, but you see all these little walls? Do you see how that soil wants to aggregate itself into what I call cookie crumb structure? What I called, right, chocolate cake structure, cottage cheese? That's what I love to see, right? That's aggregation. That provides the home. And I always ask, how well do inflated basketballs pack in a box? They don't, right? All right? You're a smart group. You know they don't pack very well, right? You end up with a lot of pore space. That's what I want in my soil. I want inflated basketballs. You can tell I taught college. I want inflated basketballs packed in a box, right? Because they don't pack very well. That empty space in a soil provides an area for air and water movement, that infiltration we talked about, as well as root growth, and a space for those organisms to live. This is in Green Lake County, right? What do you see there? That was a really cool pit to get into, right? Just because you're looking at me, why, Jamie? Why was that a cool pit? Because it was the only pit I've ever been able to do this. See this crack right here? I slid my hands in the crack and I picked the entire soil surface up and talked to people. I'm like, here's your soil, right? It isn't aggregated, it's one big gigantic chunk, right? That's a lack of aggregation. That's why it was a cool pit, because I've never been able to do that before. You can see it has lots of organic matter. It wants to be a great soil. It dreams of being a great soil, right? It just isn't a great soil because it doesn't have that aggregation. So what are we doing to destroy those homes, right? When you think about it, those physical properties, this makes me want to puke every time I see it. Right? Wheel tracks. Right? Whether it's in your own yard, Don't tell me you weren't guilty. You took the lawnmower out, right? You were very self-conscious of your tall grass, and you took your lawnmower out early, and you smashed your soil down. Admit it. Right. It looks a little different in your lawn than it does in a field, right? But what did you do? You destroyed aggregation. When we destroy aggregation either through tillage or through increased compaction, we end up with, you'll notice I'm a linear thinker, compact tillage, compaction, fewer pores, less biology, less infiltration, more runoff, more sediment, more nutrient transport, more water quality. We eliminate the pore space in the soil through tillage. We eliminate the pore space in the soil through compaction. Water doesn't move in, water moves off. Water moving off takes sediment and nutrients with it for water quality. What about chemical properties? What about chemical properties, right? Over-application of manure or nutrients, I don't care what it is. Over-application of any nutrient, cheese waste, whatever it may be, right? Those mycorrhiza, those beautiful little mycorrhiza, the symbiotic fungi that I talked about, they only live when we have an adequate amount of phosphorus. We get too much, the mycorrhiza get lazy and they don't infect the plants. They don't reproduce, they don't become so abundant in the soil. So over-application of manures can lead to poor water quality. You got that one, right? That one's easy to understand. But how about under-application of nutrients? No one thinks about that. As a nutrient management specialist, right, it's just as important to have nutrients out there, right? That beautiful cover crop that we talked about, that armor, that shield that's providing that home for the organism, it needs fertility, right? When I have the nutrients that it needs, we maximize above ground biomass, and as a soil scientist, I get more excited about root growth. When it has adequate fertility, it produces a big, healthy root system that creates that pore space, that creates that habitat for those organisms. I need those roots. If I don't have them under application, less plant roots, less infiltration, less runoff, more nutrient, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. It's hard, right? Not too much, not too little, just right. That's what we're looking at. And that is hard to do, right? Those biological systems, that's where I said chemistry was so easy, right? I mix two chemicals together, I can tell you what's gonna happen. It's chemistry. Biochemistry, it's a real pain in the butt, right? You start to bring living organisms into the system and they're unpredictable, right? That's where I work a lot up here. I have cover crops down at PAR, so Peninsula Ag Research Station, right? How fast are they gonna break down? I don't know. It's biological, right? You warm up, you get proper moisture, those organisms are gonna break it down and reduce that residue. You don't, they don't break down. It's all dependent upon what that organism does. When are the nutrients gonna be released? It's whenever the organisms get around to it, right? It's a biological system. It's really hard to predict. So this is why water quality in the last session on Inter 151, they asked if the new rules were gonna solve our water quality issues. No. No. Solving is a big goal. Right? Improve? Yes. Dramatically improve? Potentially. Solve? Oh no. Right? Because we're always going to have Mother Nature. We're always going to have biology. And we had some of these water quality issues before we even got here as Europeans. Right? Some of them. Some of them are natural. The Grand Canyon eroded. And that's not accelerated erosion. Stuff happens. There are natural processes. We can improve them. And that's our goal, is cover, you're noticing, reduced tillage, cover crops. You're seeing more and more of those landscapes. This is why they've heard me stand up here, wave my arm and preach. Right? That's what I do, preach the benefits of soil health. What about the biological properties? Those critters need something to eat and they need a home. You'll notice increased tillage. How does increased tillage reduce biological activity? Everybody wonders why tillage decreases aggregation also. We don't understand why tillage is so bad, right? So I always point out that I was raised by a good German grandfather, right? So our garden was tilled to snot, right? There was never a weed in it. Rows were straight. It was beautiful, because the concept that we had of beautiful was you saw black dirt, right? We thought, we had this idea that we till soil to create aggregates. We don't. Why doesn't tillage create aggregates? You all think that, we all think that, right? You go off the tiller and you get these big chunks at the surface and say, created aggregation, water's gonna go in, it's all perfect. That was my point, but that is not how it works. Why not? What happens, and it has to do with the biology. Why is tillage not creating aggregation?
Breaks them apart.
It breaks them apart, and it has everything. Pardon me?
Disturbs the ecology of the soil.
It disturbs the ecology of the soil. When you think about this soil right now, right here, right? This soil hasn't been disturbed, the soil has, right? What is the limiting factor for biological activity over here, probably right now? Oxygen, right? Well, air only moves so quickly in and out of that soil, right? And so because of the limited oxygen, it maintains a biological community at a population that's in equilibrium. You till it, wham! You fertilize, quote unquote, that soil with oxygen. What happens? Biological activity perks right up. They eat your organic matter. When they eat your organic matter, that organic matter is the glue that's holding your aggregates together. So that tillage process that you did to create aggregates did so in the very short term. In the long term, it destroyed them. It destroyed the glues that held them together. This is why minimizing tillage, minimizing that disruption, that interjection of oxygen over the long term can help to increase water quality. I don't till, I don't stimulate biology, right? I don't stimulate biology, I get aggregation, I get water moving in, water not moving out, off, carrying that nutrient sediment. I am, okay? It is, right? So how do we, yep. It gets so angry at me sometimes. All right, make that go forward, please. So what is this? One more. Or backwards, forwards. There we go. There we go. That, yeah, let's go there. Why not? Beautiful, right? When you look at many of the agricultural systems in this area, I'm actually very, very proud of Northeast Wisconsin. Things are changing, right? Things are changing for the better. You're seeing a lot of change in mindset where, again, this doesn't look so pretty anymore, right? Admit, deep down in your heart, it looks nice, right? You think it looks nice. I know. I have very theories on this, why we think it looks nice, but it doesn't. I don't want that to look that way. I want it to look like this big weedy mess over here. Right? And we have to stop calling it a big weedy mess. We have to call it a microbe home builder. Right? We have to call it microbe food. We have to call it a soil health builder. 1 minute, right? This, as you drive around the landscape here in Northeast Wisconsin, notice the improvements that are being made in agricultural systems. You notice I keep talking systems. It's a system change. Things are starting to be green in the winter as cover crops are being planted. Manure is starting to be applied in season. Oh God, I love that, right? Plants need nutrients when they're growing, right? So these low disturbance manure applicators you're seeing out on the landscape, awesome. You're starting to see that no-till or reduced tillage, fantastic. It's a mindset change. I still remember my husband and I, our first house, I'm gonna go over a minute. First house in Iowa, right? We lived on a dual farm, God forbid, don't ever do that. All right, so his grandparents lived up the hill. And the new cash renter of that ground was switching over to no-till. Grandma came out of the house and she's like, lots of expletives. And then she said, this field, it was corn, looks like a disaster. I'm gonna burn that residue.
Oh.
Like, and then more expletives came out of my mouth. I'm like, no, you're not, because you'll burn down our homes. That's a bad idea, right? Change the mindset. Change the farming practice. She saw crop residue. She wanted to burn it off, light it on fire, because it didn't follow her preconceived notion of what agriculture should look like. So even though, right, it's easy as pie. Right? We know how to do this. It's a change in mindset, but it's also an increase in risk. Okay? So I see Don standing over here and Jamie smiling at me, right? Don, how's the planting going? Exactly, all right? So, all of these things that I just talked about, right, introduce risk into a farming system. They introduce economic risk and they introduce agronomic risk. And in years like this, sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow because now I have a living cover. And I can tell you from my PARS research, right? At least my cover crops, you're not gonna like this. My cereal rye and trit, they're colder and wetter than my areas that don't have a plant. Depends on the area, sometimes they're warmer, sometimes they're drier, depending upon biological activity. Mine's colder and wetter. Nobody wants to hear the words colder and wetter this spring, right? So it introduces risk. But we're making changes, a lot of positive changes. And it has to do with this change in mindset. So as I wrap up, hopefully I've done a little bit to change your mindset. It only gave me 30 minutes. So now, when you see that soil, picture that beautiful little cartoon house, okay? Because that's what it is. And that's how we're moving towards changing our management, both on homeowner scale, lakeshore owner scale, as well as the farming scale. So with that, I will take probably a couple questions before I'm out of time. Yes, sir.
Chemical usage, long-term soil health. For no tillage, you gotta have Kenny's.
Yep.
You got chemicals, not just pesticides, but fertilizers. So what's the long-term impact of soil health?
It's amazing, and so you're asking me a very complex question, and I have to give you a very general answer, right? So it really depends upon what chemicals you're using and at what rates. In all reality, many of the herbicides that we use, remember, a lot of them are carbon-based, right? They're food sources for many of these organisms, right? They don't last forever. Okay? So if we go out and we use our inputs judiciously, and farmers are doing that, right? It's an added expense. Homeowners are doing that. You use them judiciously. You use them when you need them and how they're supposed to be applied and at the rates they're supposed to be applied. We're gonna have a minimal impact on soil health. You get crazy, things are gonna go awry quickly. But it's a biological system, right? It returns. They have reproduction rates like in the hours. So I kill them to now, and by the end of the day, I got a few million more on some of these critters. So I know you don't, when you're looking at me, you hate that answer. I'm sorry.
It's because the truth empowers us all. Just because I don't like Kenny's doesn't mean that knowing the truth is a mistake.
And it is. There's some that are worse than others, right? Yeah. So, right, if you gave me a choice between arsenic and Roundup, I sure as hell would drink that Roundup all day long, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah. Class action suit.
No, it's not. All the research has shown it's not a carcinogen, right? So I know. Don't get me there. I've been bathed in it. I'm fine so far. But if I had to choose between arsenic, PCBs, you brought PCBs, arsenic, or Roundup, I'd sure as hell drink the Roundup all day long. So it's about choices. It's about choices. It's about minimizing risk. So as we make good choices, soil health, I could go on for days and tell you about how soil health is reduce weed issues, because when you have more bugs out there, then they eat the weed seeds and so forth. We get that reduction, you improve cover, right? When you cover, then those weed seedlings die before they get the sunlight, and so I can reduce breed populations that way. They only gave me half an hour, I can't go there. So, but it's a really complex system. And that's why when I get questions, that's why I hate taking questions and I'm kind of still talking so you can't ask me anything, right? So, because you want a general answer, and my honest to God answer is, it really does depend. And that is truly the appropriate answer. Yes, ma'am, I will take a question.
Oh, I was just gonna say, could you speak of complementary plantings? So, and how those help out with this system? You know,
So you mean like interseeding?
Well, complementary, like carrots and tomatoes, you know, how you
She's going into the gardening realm with me. All right, yeah, there are some wonderful complementary. I'm going to take it back to large scale because, and let's be honest, I'm a terrible gardener. You know, when we look at many of these systems, we're doing a lot of when you hear the word interseeding in an agricultural system, that's a lot like that, right? The whole idea is that you're cold here up in northern Wisconsin. If you haven't figured that out, winter comes quickly, right? So oftentimes we don't have an opportunity to establish that cover crop. So the new idea, right, it's not new, but new to us, we interseed, right? Into that corn crop, I start to plant my cover crop, and maybe that is an annual clover. It's a lot like that companion planting, right? Now I have a legume out there that's fixing nitrogen, helping to shade that soil, helping to control those damn weeds that we don't like, right? Beneficial plant that I am just growing simply as cover inside my cash crop. So there are ways as we start to look at, it's called regenerative agriculture and agroecology, we start to, and you heard the terms, mimic nature, right? We know there's some opportunities for us to look at our systems and start to integrate some of those ideas, long-held ideas and proven processes that were used on a small scale, now on a larger scale. So, not exactly gardens, but there's some really cool things. And I encourage you to get out and see some of the field days and see some of these new technologies I call them new technologies. Please realize if you go back and read the 1938 Yearbook of Agriculture after the Dust Bowl, basically it's everything I'm saying right now. So I call them new, but in all reality, we're rediscovering what we already knew and now implementing what we already knew. Yes, sir?
Has the information that's been gleaned through...
Questions?
That's actually all the time we have. If you have more questions, feel free to ask her. I'm asking for a round of applause.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for having me. Commercial fishery in Door County is probably one of the oldest industries up here. And, my brother and I and my family now probably some of the last fishermen left here in Door County. But fishing has changed considerably since the early days. We have pretty good fishing, and then we also have some big concerns about the way things are going with the fish stocks and that in the state. I'll try and there we go. If you're familiar with Bailey's Harbor at all, I'll try and give you a little background on our fishery. This is my grandfather's fishery, right where the town marina is. He had his farm right across the street where the town hall is. And this is the mid-1800s. That's when he came to Bailey's Harbor and was one of the original settlers. If you look at the shoreline all the way along there, there's no development at all. It's all pine and everything. That all came later on. This is a picture of my dad and my uncle. They were breaking ice with a wooden gillnet boat. This would be about, in the 1930s, I'd say, out of Bailey's Harbor again. And this is that was our fish rig just about 2 weeks ago. I took those pictures. Yeah, we have converted mostly to live entrapment nets. This is lifting a trap net over on the Green Bay side, and it was pretty cool that morning. You can see the steam and the fish all baggy in there. We've gone to live entrapment because it's easier to maintain a good quality product, and a lot of people think that we take all the fish that you can catch. All the fish in there are scooped in live and put on ice in those plastic containers. And we go through the fish when we take a scoop like that. We go through the fish and pick out the ones we want. And we actually let least a 17-inch fish before we take it. Yeah, there you can see that he probably picked 2-3 fish out of that lugger and the measuring lugger, and then we just dumped the rest of them back live. We also get a lot of other fish in the scoop. What we've been doing with the DNR this year is we're doing a study with them. We actually count all the fish. So they have a bycatch study, they call it. So we tell them how many we release. What we do is the first few scoops, we count how many fish we might have in the net on whitefish. And then after we do 2-3 scoops, then we just average it out and take out the amount that we keep, and we let the rest go. We also keep track of all the other species that we catch in the net too. So they're getting quite a bit of information out of the fishery with us. And then along with that, on the Green Bay side, we've been getting a lot of walleyes. So after you make 3-4 scoops in the net, we generally get too many walleyes. If we dump them, we don't like to get them in the measuring board. And so he takes, the guy who's scooping goes in there and tries to get a couple of big scoops of walleye and throw them out of there so that we don't have to deal with them in the measuring board. A lot of people would really be surprised at the amount of walleyes that are over in the Green Bay side. And that gets us to the concern that when we get down to the bottom of the net, you can see the amount of walleyes that are still in there. They're upside down, but they'll go. They just are just crowded up in the net and that. But we have in the last few years, we've got natural reproduction of walleyes on Green Bay side, and it's really coming on strong. And I just got the Outdoor News put out by the DNR yesterday in the mail, and they're saying that the 2018 year class of walleyes is probably going to be bigger than the 2013, which was the biggest year class they had since 2010. So we're really getting a lot of walleyes in the Green Bay side. We also are getting northern. A lot of people don't realize that the northern on Green Bay are starting to reproduce and get a lot more northern than we used to have. And one of the reasons is they spend time down by Pensaki in the DNR and worked on helping the area there clean it up so they could get more northern up in ponds and to be able to get back out and spawn naturally than they did before. And we also get like bullheads in the nets, and also catfish. We get sheep's head, we get a lot of sturgeon. There's a lot of variety of fish over in Green Bay. Like I say, these nets are all live entrapment, and they can catch, like that first lift there was probably 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of fish, and we have to work our way through that. One of the things that concerned me that I read here a couple weeks ago, and this is another fishing report that's put out by the DNR. You can pick it up at Fleet Farm or at any DNR service center or various sports shops and that. And they were talking about how they've got northern pike now in the bay, and they're reproducing good, and that's really good that they're having that, because they've got ample forage base for the northern. And they said that forage fish, there's plenty of forage fish like yellow perch, gizzard shad, and gobies. Well, they, in the same paper that they put out, they said that on the whole thing went out. Anyhow, the Lake Winnebago water flowage has a problem with gizzard shad this year. They said they didn't have very good recruitment, and we haven't seen very many gizzard shad either. And as far as gobies, everything is eating gobies now. You've got whitefish, everything, any kind of fish at all is dependent on gobies. Everybody used to think that that's going to be a problem, but it's actually really is helpful that we've got the gobies to back up. The alewife population is way down. And in this outdoor news, our former fisheries chief, Lee Kernan, rode with the DNR here a couple weeks ago, and he had made the comment in there that they never saw a alewife all day. And so we're, from the commercial fishery, we're really concerned about the forage costs over there, what we're going to feed all of these predator fish. The other predator fish that I have some pictures here if we can ever get to it or anything, but is they're planting muskies now in Green Bay. And I think by numbers, they've got 49,973 muskie in the last, since 2010, they've planted in the bay. If you're a muskie fisherman, a lot of those guys know how to actually catch the muskies, and they do pretty good, but the average person doesn't catch a muskie. And, but we catch them in the nets, and I've got pictures here if we ever do of inside muskies. One of the reasons we're concerned about the walleye increasing is that they've, I sometimes do diet studies in some work we do out west. And when I purged some of the walleyes here 2 weeks ago, I brought samples along of what was in the stomachs. They're eating whitefish like crazy, you know. And I've got the samples here. I kind of wanted to do show and tell because then you know it's there. You can see for real what it is. They also, I think almost all the biologists agree that we would have more yellow perch on Green Bay if we didn't have so many walleye. I've got a slide in here that I took out of the 2016 Lake Michigan report of the Fishery Commission, and it showed that the walleye production is above what they had expected to even have. And now if we have the 2018 even being higher than that, we really get concerned. And our other concern is that we're getting more and more walleyes coming out into Lake Michigan. So now North Bay, Moonlight Bay, all along through there, and I've got some pictures of that too, have big walleyes all the way along out there. We also have muskies out in Lake Michigan now. And our whitefish biologist is concerned about not having enough small whitefish for recruitment on the North Moonlight Bay grounds and that over there. But we're concerned about having too many predator fish moving into the area. Even though walleye and muskie and northern are all natural fish, they never were helped along with their reproduction like they're doing now. And a lot of that comes from the pressures on the DNR from the sport fishery. They're constantly wanting more and more for everything, for tournament fishing and a lot of charters go for that. But somehow or other, with our forage base going down, we've got to
we've got to be able to feed all these fish, and we constantly are putting more and more. I'll just see if I can find where it is. This is I took what was left in the bottom of the nets that 2 weeks ago when I was with them, and just to show you how many walleyes, we just keep scooping the whitefish out as much as we can, and you get down to the bottom and it's walleyes everywhere. This is the fish community objective graph that I wanted to show you from the Lake Michigan Committee's 2016 report. And now you can imagine over there where the red arrow is, it goes even higher with the 2018, and also 17 wasn't that bad either. So we've had a lot of more reproduction. So we're above their objectives. And if you look in the corner, in the top corner, yeah, see up in there? Yeah. That's whitefish that I think probably that walleye they got scooped in, burped up in the corner. And that goes on all day long. We have them all over the deck. They float up on the surface and everything. So we don't have to do a stomach analysis to know that they're eating them that day. But I did do it, so I had samples. This is a picture, they pulled one out and threw it down on the deck on the net in the boat. That's a whitefish sticking out of the mouth of a walleye. And that's in the pan when I purge a walleye. There's the little shaft that goes in the mouth. You stick it in there and it goes down by the stomach. You have a 12-volt water pump and you just turn it on short and it spits out everything that it was eating. And that's a whitefish that's chewed up. This is typically what it looks like in a pan too. You have all different sizes. I see a goby there, a smelt, and then a few whitefish. And this one over here is probably too far gone to tell what it is. I had a sportsman after I talked at a forum meeting in Cleveland, Wisconsin a year or so ago that sent me this picture. That's a perch inside of some walleyes that he had caught. This is a picture that I had the guys out west. We do work on Lake Ponderay in Idaho. We had trimmed down, we had removed a lot of the lake trout because they're a predator too. They're not native out there in Lake Ponderay. And that lake is 1,300 feet deep. And we had the lake trout trimmed down and restored the Kokanee salmon population so that they were running and people were really happy with that. We had bull trout, Kokanee salmon, and cutthroats all restored. The lake trout weren't totally gone, but they were down enough so that Kokanee could come back as a food source for all the native fish. And we were, in the middle of the winter, we were fishing in the deep water, 263 feet, looking for small lake trout, which the small lake trout were thick out there in that area. And we started, 3 years ago, we started to get, all of a sudden we started to get walleyes. Somehow or other, somebody planted walleyes in that lake. So after 3 years, this last year, the state of Idaho has us now fishing walleyes out there to try and trim down the walleye stock so they don't lose all their Kokanee salmon again, and also their bull trout, and we're maintaining the level of lake trout, but the walleye are going to be really hard to do anything with that lake because they go up the rivers, they're up in the shallow water, they're all over the place, and they have just exploded in 3 years' time. This is a picture that one of the hatchery guys gave me. This is a walleye fry at 12 days. He's already trying to eat another walleye fry. So if they tell you it's not a problem, that they aren't really, a real predator, I'll tell you. This again is this you can get one of these fishing reports. Well, Fleet Farm is the easiest one, but I think that DNR service centers probably have them too. And they'll tell you it's all pro sport fishing. You know, they never really talk about the rest of the story. The actual fish-eating public now has been almost crowded off the lake. Everything is for, if I were to say I should take some walleye, oh, the sport groups would just go up in arms and you'd be just a war. And the DNR biologists know it. But at the last Fisheries Forum meeting about 2 weeks ago, it was about planting on Lake Michigan. And DNR and Fish and Wildlife and Sea Grant put together a real nice program for about 2 hours and talked about all the planting and how the predator-prey relationship was, and that we needed enough feed, that the alewife stocks were down and everything. And when they got all done, they had questions and answers, and the sport groups and their lawyer and lobbyists met just went right after the DNR. We need more. We need more. You got to plant more. And they're talking about Lake Michigan not having enough salmon on the Wisconsin side. They've got 6 rivers in Michigan that are putting out salmon now, coho salmon, or Chinook salmon. And there was an estimate, I think they said the other, at that last meeting, that there's 3.5 million Chinook a year coming out of those rivers in Michigan. And they also, in Wisconsin, still plant 844,000 Chinook. So, and then along with that, they plant 361,000 coho, 329,000 browns, 310,000 rainbow, and we have natural reproduction on northern and walleye in Lake Michigan. I don't know how our whitefish are going to survive this, because the chub population now has really gone down, and a lot of that has to do with the quadrille mussel on the bottom of the food chain. These 2 pictures we see every day. If you say that muskie or big walleyes don't have any impact on whitefish, every day we see big bites in the fish and that out there. It's not uncommon for us to see. This is a picture taken in Moonlight Bay out on Lake Michigan last fall. That's a muskie in Moonlight Bay. And I doubt if you were to ask most people if they thought muskie were in the lake, they'd say, there's no muskie there. But they're spilling out of the bay. And they're generally those major predator fish look for new area when they don't have enough feed. And both the walleye and there's a different one. You can see Caney Island in the background there too. The muskies out there. We see a lot of them like that in Green Bay side now too. But if they planted over 50,000, we're going to start to see more. The other thing that's going on in Green Bay, a lot of people don't even realize, is the state of Michigan in Beta Knot. I didn't have time this year to pull up the Fishery Commission's website and find out how many they had planted there, but the state of Michigan had planted in, I think in about a 10-year period, they had planted 14 million walleye in Beta Knot and along that area. And that doesn't count what Cora or the tribes have planted over there too. And that goes along with all our natural reproduction. And I'm not sure whether our state is still planting some walleye too. So when you talk about predator fish, I got this slide at the forum meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I thought it was pretty cut and dry. When it takes 1 million pounds to get 10 pounds of salmon, and we're really hurting on the bottom end of the food web there with the quadrille mussel and the alewife population being down. I don't see how we can keep on planting all these fish and keep on satisfying all the sport groups that want more all the time, and still keep our native fish. Perch and whitefish shouldn't be used as forage for for the salmon. This is another Titus with sea granulating this one. But it's pretty dramatic when you look at it like that. And we're losing the whole bottom end, you know, and to be able to support all of those fish. This is, we were doing a contract in Montana on Swan Lake, and we were there about 3-4 years, and we were winning the battle with taking lake trout out, because they're not native there. That's, Swan Lake is right below Glacier Park. And one day we were lifting, and all of a sudden a walleye came up in the nets. And we couldn't believe it. By the end of that contract period, they had caught 3 walleyes. So the Montana biologists took those walleyes and they did DNA sample on them, and they found out they didn't come from the same watershed. So they put out a reward for $30,000 if they could find out who dumped those in there. They call them bucket biologists out there. They never did find out. They never found the guys or anything. So what they did is they threw in the towel at Swan Lake. They said, if you're going to have walleyes in there, we'll never be able to restore it back to a natural trout lake again. And so right now, it's been 3-4 years, and I think Montana biologists have experimented a little bit with testing, and they found that the walleyes are exploding in that lake too. The only reason I brought this up is because if it's that way there, I can't believe that it's not going to be that way here. And this is another graph that I took out of one of the reports from around here. That's 2016. I'm sure that it's gone way up since then. That's the amount of catch that people are catching. Well, it's great to do that, but why should we be feeding our perch and our whitefish to those so that we can have a sport fishery that's above what is even expected? This is another example. If you go to greenbayicefishing.com on the website, you'll see they have generated a huge sport fishery for whitefish now in the wintertime on the ice. This last year, the ice wasn't very good. It got a lot of snow on it, and it got water under it. So I think the catch was down a little bit by the sport fishery. But if you have a good winter with good ice, the sport fishery will now easily outproduce the commercial quota that we have. And I see that there's a bottom picture there as walleyes are catching up. This is our shop over in Bailey's Harbor. And this is where when we catch the fish, we come in, back up the trucks on the other side and process in there. And we have scaling machines and filleting machines, and a lot of things we do to process for the restaurants and also for retail sales here in the county, so people can still get fresh fish that are caught right here on Green Bay or Lake Michigan. Okay, I think that was the end of the slides.
First of all, it's really discouraging about the walleyes. I've been doing my best to clean them off, and I haven't been doing very well. That made me feel better about myself. In terms of the whitefish fishery, I noticed you said a lot about Green Bay. You do have nets on the lakes. What's the biggest difference in the whitefish populations on the Green Bay and the lakeside?
Green Bay has a real good population, and that's what really worries us now too. A lot of the population is what they're calling a river fish now, and we know because we're the farthest guys fishing the furthest south. We're down past Langkill Road, if you know where that is, and down, we probably go almost Sugarwood. And so they have been tagging whitefish in the Fox River and that. And the whitefish, we've turned in the most tags and caught the most tagged fish that were in the Fox River. And we still get tags. The guys are lifting today. Yesterday they had tags.
These are the ones that are spawning in the river.
Yeah, they tag them down in there just to see how long they hang around. And the southern Green Bay whitefish seem to stay between the Pestigo, O'Connell, and Fox River down there. They do go up farther. A few tags have been caught out farther than that, but not too much. Now, the last 2 years, we were concerned that there's been a trawler in Two Rivers that wanted to introduce trawling on Two Rivers for whitefish. And the Door County fishermen have no use for trawling because it's too hard on the fish stocks, too hard on the young one, everything that comes with it, you know, and everything. So anyhow, they started with Sea Grant monitoring a study down there, along with the Door County fishermen, worked with the DNR. I think Fish and Wildlife was in on it too. And the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, we all got together and we bought the tags and we put tags into the whitefish, and this is 2 years ago now, in Bay de Noc, in North Bay, Moonlight Bay, and Whitefish Bay out in Lake Michigan. And lo and behold, the trawler in Two Rivers now, as of this year, has caught more Bay de Noc tags and North Moonlight Bay tags than the other fishermen have caught all told. So they were trying to sell the program that they needed to be able to trawl down there because they had their own stock of fish down there. We knew from, we did a tagging study with Stevens Point and the DNR, say 35 years ago. They did it out of our pond in North Bay. We knew that fish migrated down the lake after spawning. After they spawn in North Moonlight Bay, they head on down around Lake Michigan and sometimes even over toward Michigan up that side and then back again to North Moonlight Bay in the fall. But I don't know what the DNR is going to do with the trawling issue, the trawler that wants to get down there. Because if he gets down there and they okay and let him go, the other trawler that runs out of Michigan, the state of Michigan bought out all their commercial fishermen and got rid of them, and they went for sport fishing. They thought that was the way to go. But they said they would allow one fisherman in Michigan, and he's a trawler, and that's over there out of Cedar River. And he brought in a trawler that's like an ocean type trawler. He has a quota of 400,000 pounds, and he was at the last fisherman's board meeting, and he was laughing. He said he caught 440,000 pounds, and the state of Michigan fined him $50 for the extra 40,000 pounds. So he's going to Lansing now, and he's already been there. He's asking, he wants the state of Michigan to give him another 400,000 pounds. So he'll have 800,000 pounds of whitefish quota. Our quota over on the Green Bay side, let's see, I had it here. It's about 250 to 280,000 for all the fishermen, for everybody total. And then if you figure the sport fishery is probably catching almost as much. And if they had a good winter, they'd probably catch more than that than we would. Now the DNR, we're on what we call a limited entry fishery. The DNR sets the total quota, and the fishermen, their quota is all decided by a previous catch data that they had when they first started out, or if they bought out other fishermen. So in order to get bigger or get more quota, you have to buy somebody now to do that. There's actually commercial fishing licenses available out there, but there aren't any good unless you have a quota to go with it. And we had an opportunity here last fall to buy another 40,000 pounds, and we decided that we're not going to buy any more quota. It's a poor investment. Generally costs, the guys generally want about $5 a pound for a permanent, and you pay about $1 a pound for a temporary. You can do that too. And so I'd be real leery about expanding or even buying any more quota, and I'm really concerned in the lake. Although we did set trap nets in the lake this year in the spring, and we are finding that there are more 2- and 3-year-old whitefish than there has been for a few years. And the other thing that I tribe are allowed to take lake trout. And they're in the process of negotiating their treaty, and they have increased their quotas. So the tribe has what they call big boats and small boats. They have 6 big boats. They're the size of our gill net boats. They generally fish gill nets over there. And they run out of Manistee or up at Fairport and along Bay to Dock and through that area. And so they are asking for 525,000 pounds for the 6 big boats and some small boats for the tribe. And the 6 big boats will probably get about 75 to 80,000 each pounds for themselves of lake trout. And we've worked now 50 years to try and get natural reproduction of lake trout. And this last year, they were getting pretty good reproduction down on Julian's Reef out of Milwaukee and that. So the sport groups and the lobbyists all went right to Madison. They increased the sport catch from 2 to 5. And they got it right through, no problem. You want to take care of the charter boats and everybody. So then the treaty now, they want to go ahead and increase their catch. So the surprising thing is the only way we're not allowed any sport fish or any salmon or trout or anything. The law reads overboard, dead or alive for us. And so we actually are the ones that would supply fish in the fish market for a fish eating customer, or whatever. But right now the whole trend, and there's so much pressure from the sport fisheries to push for more and more and more all the time that they don't seem to care about the fish eating public at all, or the restaurants. And the tribes, in order for us to have lake trout in our fish market, which we do, we buy from the tribe. About 3 weeks ago, I bought 750 pounds of lake trout from them. They came out of Bay to Dock, and when we got them, we expected to have some decent sized fish in there and everything. Turned out, I would say there was about 650 pounds of lake trout, about that long. They're the same year class I'm catching in front of Bailey's Harbor that's naturally reproduced now. They don't have any fin clips, so we know they're natural. So now we've got the tribes wanting to go and fish out the lake trout that we've worked for 50 years to try and get natural reproduction. But the thing about it is the lake trout, their food that they're naturally would eat would be like chubs or whitefish or something. But they are a pretty versatile fish. They'll eat just about anything. So they wouldn't have to, if the chub stocks were extinct or something, they would still find something to eat. But I just can't get over how our agencies or whoever would allow now the tribes to go and fish out after 50 years of work. And I think Mark has worked a lot on it too, that, and it feels probably the same way I do, about that. There's nothing wrong with giving them some, but to have them up there fishing those out too. The other thing is, I think that Howard Tanner, when he dumped the first trout in over in Michigan, he said, I'm either going to be a hero or a heel. Well, he was a hero for about 30 years, but I don't know, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, something's got to give out there, and I don't think it's going to be a good thing to have all the salmon pouring out of those rivers, along with everything that they're trying to plant too, and expect that you're going to keep the native forage like whitefish and that if we've lost the alewife. And there is some smelt population, but it's hit and miss. It's up a little bit this year, but it's been down too. So there just isn't going to be enough feed for all these predator fish. And at the last forum meeting, after they spent all the time, telling these guys all the way it is and everything, they just won't buy it. They just won't determine they're going to get more. So, yeah.
What's happening with PCB and mercury levels in the fish that you're catching?
I think since they cleaned up the Fox River and of course on the Door County side, I don't think we ever had real problem with the industry over there, anything but, well, I should say on the Lake Michigan side. But I think it's made a big difference over on the Fox River. I haven't seen anything from the last year or two, but everything up to that was coming right on down, and that it really helped.
What's the forecast for chub recovery?
Well, it's gonna, they could do it. There's a brood stock, but there's not many left, and the quagga mussel is really, hard and heavy at the base of them. We haven't had a lot of, I don't think DNR has done any sampling up by us in the last 2-3 years. We need to get out there, we just haven't had time. We'll keep an eye on it, but the chubs are real old.
Do you see any chance that lake trout would ever come back? I mean, I've read in the book that there were 6 million pounds a year taken out of Lake Michigan back then.
The lake trout are coming back right now.
But are you going to have access to them as a commercial fisherman?
No, they're only for the tribe and the sportsmen. But at the same time, we don't feel, we're set up so we could have quotas. We could actually, with our live and trapping nets and that, they could say only take a 19-inch fish, and we could do that. We could let the rest go. But one of the big reasons that I think the sport fishery out of Milwaukee got a big increase is that's the only place they were really looking at the lake trout at the time to any extent. And so they discovered all the natural reproduction. We've got 3-year classes, and I found the 3rd-year class when I brought the lake trout from the Indians. They're that long. And then we got the 18-inch, 18 to 20-inch that we have. I saw this spring off of Bailey's Harbor, quite a few. We're talking about 20% of your catch was naturally reproduced lake trout. And then you've got a size a little bit bigger, not too many of those, but they're about that big. And I think those are part of the brood stock, that are there. The other thing, when I bought the fish from the Indians, the fish that weren't, and it seemed like, I'd say 90% of the catch was that year class, that size, the 18 to 20-inch fish. And then the other ones were the great big hatchery produced brood trout. So they're getting them on both ends. And there's nothing wrong with letting them have some. Right now, the University of Michigan over in Lansing is doing a modeling program to try and figure out how many lake trout they think are in Lake Michigan, and that'll help them try and decide, how much or how many fish would be allowed to the various people. But so far, if we even think of having any lake trout harvest at all for the consumer public, they're strictly for the sport fishery. And that comes out of the whole attitude right here of the DNR, and that comes from pressure from the sport groups and that out of Madison, that they look at everything now as a giant sport fishery. And if the fish eating public wants anything, well, we can use some help to speak up for it. But I'm more worried about the fact that they're going to keep on pressing for predator fish, and that they're going to eat up the native species as forage fish. Especially when I saw it right here in print that they call yellow perch forage for the northern pike and walleyes.
Walleye have an enemy?
Other walleyes? Yeah.
What will a muskie? Everybody.
They prefer, if you look at the diet studies, they generally want ciscos or whitefish. And they like to congregate, and you'll read articles where they like to congregate in front of a river when the ciscos are getting ready to spawn. That's what's going on in Green Bay. That's why the muskie fishermen get down there in the fall right away, and they do good. But how many people, there's a lot more people that are interested in fishing perch than that are interested in fishing muskie. You have like the state of Michigan over on Saginaw Bay, they have a big perch fishery for hook and line for people. And they started to get walleye in there, and what they did is they increased the bag limit for the sport fishermen, and they also considered having the tribal guys take some of them out of there too. I don't know where they'll go with that, or even commercial fishermen. But they are concerned about it because they make more money off of the license fees from perch fishing with all the small boats and off the docks and everything than they would off of walleye fishing.